My name's Jake Thompson. I'm a detective with the Bayview Police Department, clocking in at a solid 37 years old. If I say so myself, I've kept in good shape for my age, broad shoulders, a bit of a six-pack left from my gym days, and a decent jawline that makes shaving a pain but the wife happy. Speaking of, I've been married to Sarah for 15 years. We met back in college, where I was the gym rat studying criminal justice, and she was the quiet one buried in textbooks. Sarah wasn't what you'd call that girl back then. She carried some extra weight and even more self-doubt. But I saw past all that. By the time she finished her glow-up, a year into dating, thanks to a mix of my workout tips and her sheer willpower, she transformed into a woman who could stop traffic. I'd like to think I was the lucky one, though she likes to remind me it was mutual. So when my buddy and neighbor Brian Turner called me on a random Tuesday morning saying we needed to talk man to man about something involving Sarah, you can imagine my confusion. Brian, his wife, and Sarah all grew up in the same small-town bubble. They were practically family before I came into the picture. So I figured this might be about some high school drama Sarah had conveniently forgotten to tell me. I agreed to meet Brian for lunch, half-jokingly wondering if Sarah had once egged a principal's car. At noon, we sat at Joe's Grill, one of those places where the ketchup bottles stick to the table. Brian's a good guy, kind of soft around the edges, a bit of a beer gut, but with a sharp mind hidden beneath his flannel shirts. After some small talk and burgers, Brian finally leaned in and said, "Jake, you ever hear about Freddy Big Rod Turner?" I raised an eyebrow. The nickname isn't ringing a bell, but I've got a feeling you're about to enlighten me. Brian chuckled, a bit nervously. Freddy was a local legend in high school. You know, the type: football star, homecoming king, and apparently, let's just say well-equipped. Ah, I see, I replied dryly, sipping my Coke. And what does this have to do with Sarah? Well, Brian started, clearly struggling to find the words. Freddy's gonna be at our high school reunion this Friday. And I overheard something last night between my wife and Sarah that, let's just say raised a few flags. He explained how Sarah and his wife were reminiscing about Freddy's so-called legendary status. Apparently, Freddy had called Sarah out of the blue, dropping hints about catching up privately at the reunion. Brian's wife, bless her gossip-loving heart, egged Sarah on, saying she should finally see if the rumors were true. Look, Brian continued, I don't think Sarah would do anything. But Freddy's got a reputation for not respecting boundaries. And I thought you should know. I felt my stomach knot. Sarah wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. We built a life together, our daughter Emma, the house, the late-night arguments over which Netflix show to binge. The idea of her even considering sneaking off with some washed-up high school Casanova? Unthinkable. But there was a hint of doubt now, like an itch I couldn't scratch. That night, I brought it up casually while we were making dinner. So, who's going to this big reunion of yours? I asked, chopping onions. Oh, you know, the usual crowd. Brian and Lisa, some teachers. Freddy Turner. Her tone was light, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Excitement? Guilt? Freddy Turner? Big Rod Freddy Turner. I said it with a smirk, trying to sound like I didn't care. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. Jake, don't tell me you're jealous of some washed-up high school jock. He was a jerk back then, and I'm sure he hasn't changed. Maybe. But I hear his phone's been busy, I replied, watching her reaction closely. She paused, her smile faltering for a split second. Lisa told you, didn't she? Yeah, Freddy called. Probably just fishing for attention like he always does. I told him I wasn't interested. The knot in my stomach loosened, slightly. Good, I said, forcing a grin. Because if you're even thinking about testing out Big Rod, you'll need a damn good lawyer first. She laughed, kissing my cheek. You're ridiculous. But later that night, while she was in the shower, I found myself checking her phone. No messages. No calls. Yet somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Thursday rolled around, and I couldn't shake the conversation with Brian. Sarah was her usual self, cheerful, busy with errands, and humming while she folded laundry, but something felt off. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'd let Brian's words plant a seed of paranoia. But then again, gut instincts weren't something I ignored. especially after years of catching people in lies for a living. Midday, one of my detectives, Chris Larson, knocked on my office door. "Hey boss, got something weird for you," he said, leaning on the doorframe. "I just got back from lunch at Miller's Bistro. Saw your wife there." I blinked. "Okay, and?" "She was with a guy," he continued, looking hesitant. "Didn't recognize him, but he looked familiar. They seemed friendly, maybe a little too friendly, if you know what I mean." My stomach dropped. "Describe him." "Tall, fit, blondish hair. Kind of that all-American quarterback vibe." Chris didn't need to say more. "Freddy Turner. Did you hear anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Not much." They were waiting to be seated. I caught his name, Freddy. After that, I didn't stick around. Didn't seem like my business, but I thought you should know. I nodded, my jaw tightening. "Appreciate it, Chris." The rest of the day was a blur. My mind was spinning. If Sarah wasn't interested in Freddy, what the hell was she doing having lunch with him? When I got home, she was in the kitchen, unpacking shopping bags. A new dress was draped over one chair, a sleek black number that looked like it belonged on a red carpet. "Big plans?" I asked, nodding toward the dress. She smiled, holding it up. "I got it for the reunion. What do you think?" "It's stunning." And it was. But I couldn't help wondering if the dress was for Freddy's benefit. "Thanks," she said, hanging it up carefully. "I thought it'd be nice to show everyone how far I've come since high school. Especially the ones who thought I'd always be the fat girl." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the image of her sitting across from Freddy at lunch kept flashing in my mind. "So what else did you do today?" I asked casually. "Just errands. Grocery store. Grabbed coffee with Lisa. Nothing exciting." The lie was so smooth I almost believed it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. If something was going on, I needed more than gut feelings and second-hand observations. The next day, I got my chance. At work, I had a voicemail waiting for me from the Marriott, the hotel hosting the reunion. "Hi, this message is for Sarah Thompson. Just confirming your room reservation for tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to call us back. Thanks." My heart started pounding. A room? She hadn't mentioned anything about staying overnight. When I got home that evening, Sarah was already dressed for the reunion. The black dress fit her perfectly, hugging every curve in a way that made it hard not to stare. "You look amazing," I said, meaning it despite the storm brewing inside me. "Thanks, babe," she replied, kissing me on the cheek. "I wish you could come, but I'll ride with Lisa and Brian. You'll get there when you can, right?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Don't have too much fun without me." "I'll try," she teased, grabbing her purse. As soon as she left, I went into full detective mode. I called the Marriott and asked for details about the room reservation. "Room 304, the receptionist said. "Booked under Sarah Thompson." "Perfect," I replied, my voice calm even as my pulse raced. I packed a change of clothes and waited until 8 o'clock to leave for the reunion. By then, my shift coverage was secured, and I had just enough time to find out the truth before Sarah spotted me. When I arrived at the Marriott, the banquet hall was buzzing. Old classmates were laughing, clinking glasses, and swapping stories. I scanned the room but couldn't find Sarah. Then I spotted Brian near the bar, already a couple of drinks deep. "Brian," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "Have you seen Sarah?" He squinted, clearly tipsy. "She was here earlier, man. Looking good too. But I haven't seen her in a bit. Maybe with Lisa." I frowned. "What about Freddy?" Brian laughed, a little too loudly. "Oh, Big Rod? Yeah, he was around. Saw him head toward the rooms with some hot brunette. But who knows? Probably working his magic on some poor soul." My chest tightened. Without another word, I left the hall and headed for the elevators. Room 304. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant hum of music from the party. When I reached the door, I noticed it wasn't fully shut. A crack of light spilled into the hall, and I could hear faint voices inside. Taking a deep breath, I nudged the door open. The door creaked as it opened, and I immediately regretted not knocking it down like I wanted to. The scene inside hit me like a gut punch. Freddy Big Rod Turner was sprawled on the bed, shirtless, his sculpted chest on full display. Straddling him was a woman, her dress hiked up to her hips, riding him like her life depended on it. My blood turned ice cold. "Sarah!" I barked. My voice must have startled them because the woman yelped and scrambled off Freddy, grabbing a sheet to cover herself. Only, it wasn't Sarah. It was Lisa, Brian's wife. For a second, I just stood there, dumbfounded. Then the rage hit. "Lisa!" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. Freddy, the smug bastard, didn't even bother covering himself. He just grinned at me, his infamous big rod still fully on display, unapologetically defiant. Jake," Lisa stammered, clutching the sheet like it could shield her from the situation. "This isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "You're kidding, right? What exactly would you call this? A Bible study?" Freddy finally spoke, his voice as smooth as his ridiculous ego. "Hey man. No need to get worked up. It's just a little fun." I stepped closer, fists clenched, and stared him down. "You call wrecking marriages fun?" Lisa started sobbing, but I ignored her. My focus was on Freddy, who had the audacity to smirk at me like he thought I wouldn't do anything. "You might want to shut that mouth of yours before I do it for you," I said, my voice deathly calm. Freddy, to his credit, seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing. He raised his hands in mock surrender, still smirking. Behind me, I heard movement. I turned to see Brian standing in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. "What's going on here?" Brian asked, his voice shaky. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, stepping aside so he could see the bed. Lisa tried to say something, but Brian silenced her with a look that could have stopped a freight train. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, thick and suffocating. Then Brian turned to me and said quietly, "Can you give us a minute?" I nodded and stepped into the hallway, leaving him to deal with the fallout. I needed air. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made me feel like I just chased down a perp. I hadn't even seen Sarah yet, but now I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The thought that she and Freddy could have done what Lisa had just been caught doing made me want to tear the place apart. I walked back toward the banquet hall, trying to get a grip. Just as I reached the doorway, I spotted Sarah standing by the bar, talking to a group of classmates. She was smiling, laughing, completely at ease. It threw me off. If she was up to something, she didn't show it. But the doubt was still there, gnawing at me. I walked over, forcing a casual smile. "Hey," I said, slipping an arm around her waist. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Jake. I thought you wouldn't make it until later." "Got out early," I said, keeping my tone light. "Figured I'd surprise you." She leaned in and kissed me, and for a moment, I almost believed everything was fine. But then she said, "You seem tense. Is everything okay?" I hesitated. Should I tell her what I'd just walked in on? Should I ask her outright about Freddy? Or should I play it cool and gather more evidence? Before I could decide, a voice interrupted us. Well, look who finally showed up." I turned to see Freddy, now fully dressed, strolling toward us with the swagger of someone who'd never been punched in the face but desperately needed to be. "Jake, right?" he said, offering a hand. "I'm Freddy. Old friend of Sarah's." I ignored the hand, glaring at him. "We've met." "Sort of." Freddy chuckled, unfazed. "You're a lucky guy, you know that? Sarah's a real catch." My fists tightened at my sides, but I kept my composure. "Yeah, I know. And she's not available." Freddy raised an eyebrow, glancing at Sarah, who looked confused. "Relax, man. We're just old friends catching up." "I'm sure," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Sarah put a hand on my arm. "Jake, what's going on? You're acting weird." "I'll explain later," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Freddy. "Right now, I think we've had enough catching up." Freddy smirked, clearly enjoying the tension, but he backed off. All right. I'll see you around." As he walked away, I turned to Sarah. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She frowned. What are you talking about? I hesitated, torn between accusing her and trusting her. After a moment, I said, "Never mind. Let's just enjoy the rest of the night." But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The rest of the night was a blur of forced smiles and stiff drinks. I stuck close to Sarah, trying to gauge her interactions with everyone, especially Freddy. She didn't seem overly interested in him, but I couldn't shake the image of Lisa on that bed. What if it had been Sarah? By the time the music wound down and people started saying their goodbyes, I was no closer to the truth. Sarah was laughing with a few old classmates when I noticed Freddy slip out of the banquet hall. I excused myself and followed him, keeping a safe distance. Freddy sauntered down the hallway, his movements casual but purposeful. He wasn't heading for the elevators or the lobby, he was going deeper into the hotel. Straight toward room 304. My heart pounded as I watched him enter the room without hesitation. This was it. If Sarah showed up at that door, I'd have my answer. I returned to the banquet hall, scanning the crowd for Sarah. She was still chatting, her drink in hand. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. Freddy was the type to bide his time, and Sarah was still smiling too much, laughing too easily. I walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, ready to head home?" She turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Not yet. Lisa and I were going to grab coffee in her room. Girl talk, you know." I stiffened. Lisa. The same Lisa I just caught riding Freddy. "Coffee, huh?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. Sarah nodded, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "Yeah, just for a bit. You don't mind, do you?" I forced a smile. "Of course not." She kissed my cheek and disappeared into the crowd, heading toward the elevators. I followed at a distance, staying out of sight as she entered the elevator and pressed the button for the third floor. Game time. I reached the third floor just in time to see Sarah walking down the hall. She wasn't heading toward Lisa's room. She was heading toward 304. My jaw tightened as I watched her hesitate outside the door. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. Her head turned slightly, like she was second-guessing herself. Finally, she knocked. I moved closer, careful to stay out of sight. The door opened, and Freddy's unmistakable voice greeted her. "Sarah, glad you came." My chest burned. I clenched my fists, every fiber of my being screaming at me to storm in and put an end to this. Instead, I waited. The seconds felt like hours as I stood outside the door, listening. At first, the conversation was light, catching up on old times, mutual acquaintances, the usual small talk. But then Freddy's tone changed. "You know, Sarah, you really turned out to be something special," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I mean, you're married and all, but we could have a little fun. Just like old times." I didn't hear Sarah's response, but Freddy laughed. "No need to be shy. I've got all night." That was enough for me. I stepped back, took a deep breath, and kicked the door open with all the force I could muster. Freddy jumped, startled, as the door slammed against the wall. Sarah spun around, her face a mask of shock and anger. "Jake? What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. "What am I doing?" I shot back, my voice cold. "The better question is, what are you doing?" Freddy, ever the smug bastard, stood up and crossed his arms. "Relax, man. We were just talking." "Talking?" I said, taking a threatening step forward. "That's what you call this?" Sarah's expression shifted from shock to fury. "Jake, stop. Nothing happened." "Then why are you here?" I snapped. "What the hell are you doing in this room with him?" She hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I just wanted to tell him to leave me alone. He's been messaging me, and I wanted to set the record straight." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, you wanted to set the record straight? And you thought his hotel room was the best place for that?" Before she could answer, Freddy decided to interject. "Look, buddy," she came to me. "Maybe your wife's just curious about what she missed out on in high school." That was it. I lunged at Freddy, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. His smug grin disappeared as I brought my face close to his. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" I growled. Let me tell you something, Freddy. Guys like you? They always end up alone, broke, and washed up. And if you so much as look at my wife again, you'll wish you'd never been born. Freddy gulped, his bravado crumbling under my glare. I turned to Sarah, my voice shaking with anger. We're leaving. Now. The ride home was suffocating. Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, staring out the window. The tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither of us said a word until we pulled into the driveway. As soon as the car stopped, Sarah threw open her door and marched inside. I followed, slamming the door behind me. What the hell were you thinking, Sarah? I barked, finally breaking the silence. Meeting him in his hotel room? After everything Brian told me, after I warned you. She spun around, her eyes blazing. You think I was going to sleep with him? You think so little of me that you'd kick down a door and humiliate me in front of him? Humiliate you? Are you serious right now? What about me, Sarah? What about the fact that my wife was in another man's hotel room, a man who's made it clear he wants to screw her? She threw her hands up. I told you, I went there to tell him to leave me alone. He's been messaging me, calling me, and I thought if I confronted him face to face, he'd finally back off. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, because that always works so well. And you didn't think to mention any of this to me? You didn't think your husband should know about the guy trying to seduce you? I didn't want to make it a big deal, she shot back. I thought I could handle it on my own. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You really handled it. She glared at me, her chest rising and falling as she tried to steady her breathing. Nothing happened, Jake. I would never cheat on you. Don't you know me better than that? I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the image of her standing at Freddy's door, the sound of his voice inviting her in, kept playing in my head. Do I? I said quietly. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. Instead, she turned and walked upstairs without another word. I slept on the couch that night. Or rather, I tried to. Sleep wouldn't come, not with my thoughts racing and my emotions churning. By morning, I was no closer to clarity. When Sarah came downstairs, she looked as exhausted as I felt. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her coffee untouched. Jake, she began, her voice soft, I'm sorry. I should have told you about Freddy. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. And when he didn't, I thought confronting him would end it. I didn't mean to hurt you. I studied her face, searching for any hint of deception. All I saw was guilt and exhaustion. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to prove it to you, but I swear on everything, nothing happened. Freddy's an ass, and I never should have put myself in that situation. But you have to believe me, he doesn't mean anything to me. The sincerity in her voice chipped away at my anger, but the doubt was still there, like a splinter I couldn't remove. I need time, I said, standing up. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need. Just, don't give up on us, Jake. Please. Over the next few weeks, things between us were tense but functional. We went through the motions, work, dinner, family time, but the closeness we once had was gone. Meanwhile, word of Freddy's antics spread through the reunion grapevine. Apparently, Lisa wasn't the only woman he'd tried to seduce that night, and his reputation as a sleaze was cemented. Brian filed for divorce a week later. I saw him at the gym once, and he looked like a broken man. Couldn't do it, he admitted. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was him. One night, a month after the reunion, Sarah and I sat on the couch watching a movie. It was the first time in weeks that things felt almost normal. She leaned against me, and for a moment, I let myself relax. I've been thinking, she said quietly, breaking the silence. About us. About what I did, how I hurt you. She turned to face me, her expression earnest. I know I screwed up. I know I should have come to you instead of trying to handle Freddy myself. But I also know that I love you more than anything, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Sarah, I want to believe you. I really do. But trust doesn't come back overnight. She nodded. I know. But I'm not going anywhere, Jake. And I'll keep fighting for us, no matter how long it takes. For the first time since that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. All right, I said. Let's take it one day at a time. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and rested her head on my shoulder. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start. It took months, long, awkward, emotionally draining months, but Sarah and I clawed our way back to something resembling the relationship we'd had before. Therapy helped, though I'll admit, sitting in a room with a stranger asking me to explore my feelings wasn't my favorite pastime. But it worked. Slowly, the wall between us came down. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah reached for my hand. You know, I still think about that night, she said softly. So do I admitted. Her grip tightened. Not because of Freddy, but because it almost cost me you. I was stupid, Jake. I took us for granted, and I'll never do that again. I didn't say anything, just squeezed her hand back. Some things didn't need words. As for Freddy Big Rod Turner, his 15 minutes of fame burned out spectacularly. Word of his failed seduction attempts at the reunion spread like wildfire, and his reputation took a nosedive. Turns out, being the guy everyone wants to sleep with doesn't age well when you're pushing 40 and still living like a frat boy. A few months later, I heard he'd moved out of state. Good riddance. Brian didn't fare as well. He sold his house and moved into a small apartment downtown, far away from the memories of Lisa and Freddy. Last I heard, he was seeing someone new, a bartender who'd made it her personal mission to remind him not all women are cheaters. Lisa stayed in town, though her social life took a hit. Her fling with Freddy had made her the punchline of every reunion joke. When I ran into her at the grocery store, she looked older somehow, like the weight of her choices had aged her overnight. She gave me a small, sad smile. Take care of Sarah, she said, and walked away. Life went on. Sarah and I found a new rhythm, one that involved more honesty and less taking things for granted. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was ours. And every now and then, when we crawled into bed at night, she'd whisper, "Can Cannonball Commander come out to play?" I'd roll my eyes, groan at the ridiculous nickname, and pull her close. Because in the end, love is messy, imperfect, and sometimes painfully hard to navigate. But if it's real, if it's worth it, you fight for it. And damn it, we fought.